I had my fortune read yesterday, and she gave me a serious warning about my upcoming travel plans. She told me I should consider rerouting to an entirely different country. I actually had gotten my fortune read just for fun, but she's a very established fortune teller in town, so it made it a little bit harder to just brush off. And I didn't expect that to stay with me, but it did. It just got me thinking about something I hadn't really put into words before. That sometimes the safest choice is to just stay where you are, but staying can come with its own kind of cost. And I think that's why I fell in love with these two books. I'm a librarian, so I spend a lot of time noticing the kinds of stories people return to, or the ones that seem to linger a bit. In my last video, I talked about books that focus on those small unspoken moments between people and the kinds of details that make you feel quietly seen. This feels like a continuation of that, just more internal. Because the more I sat with that idea of risk versus stability, the more I started thinking about characters who don't necessarily make these big life-changing decisions, but still feel the weight of their lives in a really real way. The first book is Stoner by John Williams. It follows a man whose life from the outside looks pretty ordinary. He becomes a professor, he gets married, and then he settles into a routine. And for the most part, he stays within that life. He's not someone who makes these huge disruptive choices or completely changes directions. But what the book does so well is show you what that kind of life actually feels like from the inside. There's this tension that builds not because of huge events, but because things don't really change. You start to notice the emotional distance in his marriage, the way conversations don't quite land, and how certain things go unspoken for so long that they just become a part of the environment. And at the same time, there are these really small moments where he does feel something real, usually through literature or in brief moments where things feel clear. But those moments don't really change the direction of his life. They just exist alongside everything else. And I think that's why the book lands the way that it does. It's not really trying to tell you that his life should have turned out differently or that there's some huge, big moment where everything could have changed. It just stays really close to his reality. The relationships that don't quite work, the things he can't fully fix, and the parts of his life that feel a bit constrained by circumstance. But at the same time, there's this steady sense of meaning running through it. And I think it ends up showing you how a life can feel limited in some ways, but still be felt so deeply and in its own way meaningfully. The second book is Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. This story follows an American man living in Paris who's trying to make sense of himself and his relationships and the kind of life he thinks he's supposed to want and build for himself. And the way the emotions unfold in this book completely just tore me apart. I had the worst book hangover after reading this, and even talking about it now, now that it's been a little bit, it still moves me so much. The way the author writes emotion here stood out so much to me because it feels immediate, but also very contained at the same time. You feel the suppression and the fear and this really strong pull toward connection that keeps pushing up against this character who's just trying to hold everything in place and hold everything inside himself. A lot of the story unfolds in this really confined space, and you really start to feel how much is being held inside that space emotionally. There's this constant tension between what's being felt and what's allowed to be said out loud. You see it in really small ways, like the hesitation before someone speaks, or the way a moment stretches because something important is just being completely avoided. Even the way connection is both wanted and resisted at the exact same time. It's not that the character doesn't feel deeply, though, it's that acting on those feelings would require a kind of risk that feels too destabilizing to his core. So instead, there's this pullback towards something safer and more familiar, I think, even if it is or feels way less honest. And that's what made it so hard for me to read at times, because you see the possibility of a different life and you also understand why it isn't chosen. I think what connects these books and what brought me back to that moment is this tension between risk and staying still. That sometimes the biggest decisions in our lives aren't really what we do, but about what we don't do. And how choosing stability or familiarity or safety can come with its own kind of cost. Not in an obvious way, but a lot more in an internal one. And I think that's why so many of us are drawn to stories like this, because they reflect something that a lot of people probably feel but don't really talk about, which is the experience of living a life that looks fine from the outside but feels so much more complicated from the inside. I think I just want to keep sharing these kinds of thoughts and little sparks I get from the books that I read and the films that I watch. So if that's something you enjoy, please feel free to subscribe. And I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever read a book that made you think about the choices that you didn't make? Feel free to share it, and I will see you in the next one.